with charred remains still washing up on the shore today and the smell of decay hanging heavy in the air. What happened at Poveglia Island in Venice that even the local fishermen refuse to get too close? Maybe it's the fact that this abandoned island is in fact filled to the brim with people. They just don't happen to be in the land of the living anymore. Hey there, dissectors. Today we're going to look at the dark history of Poveglia Island. I will try my best with pronunciation, but if I get something wrong, please be kind. This cursed land was not only the place where thousands upon thousands came to die from the plague, but was later used as a place to house the insane, and one of the doctors who treated them was straight out of a horror movie. The island is actually made up of 3 smaller islands. One is entirely vegetation, the second is where you'll find all the main buildings, and the third is shaped like an octagon made up of wooden pillars and layers of earth, and was used as a small fort to protect the island. People started to live here during the 7th century, and for many years was a peaceful community, small enough to stay off the radar of people wanting to invade, but also, because of living away from the mainland, they also avoided having to pay taxes. Sign us up, right? But then during the 14th century, the Georgia War, a conflict between Genoa and Venice, led to the island being abandoned and the population being relocated to the main part of Venice. So for a time, all was quiet on the deserted Poveglia Island. Peaceful, you might say, until it wasn't, and what followed for the next few centuries was nothing short of a shit show of horror. You see, during 1776, the island came under the jurisdiction of the local public health office and was meant to serve as a form of customs control. It was while 2 ships in 1793 were stopped at the island for a check that several cases of the plague were reported. Due to another 2 islands already being at full capacity with plague victims, it was decided that Poveglia Island, this once picturesque hideaway, was now going to be the final resting place of plague victims. And boy, were they sent by the boatloads, and for around 100 years. So as people got sick in Venice or even suspected of having the plague, they were shipped over to the island, as the spread of the disease would have been disastrous. If you contracted the disease, you could expect to experience blackened skin, especially on your nose, fingers and toes. You'd also experience abdominal pain, vomiting, diarrhea and shock. During the course of the plague, it is believed that at least 100,000 people died on the island, with the actual figure thought to be way more. When someone died on the island, their bodies would be thrown into a large hole or pit that had been dug for this purpose. When the pit became full, it would be set on fire and then the ashes covered in earth, in the hope that this would stop the spread of disease. It didn't, sadly, and as panic became worse, some people were even thrown on the pit and burned while still alive. A century later, when the mass graves were unearthed, something truly terrifying was discovered. Some graves were discovered to have skulls with large pieces of rock clamped between their teeth. It seems that when a person died, the death pit would be reopened and recently deceased bodies would be found with blood dripping from their mouths. It's thought that residents were fearful that their bodies were rising from the dead in some way, or maybe were showing signs of vampire tendencies and feeding on the dead in the pit. The actual reason for the blood was more likely a buildup of decomposition gases, which then made internal organs rupture and blood to leak from organs. The doctors on the island would wear the strange bird-like mask associated with the plague. You can imagine how sinister this must have seemed to the sick patients who want to seek out comfort but are met with the face of a creepy monster. The beak of the mask would be filled with many herbs thought to purify the illness. Not helpful when we now know the illness was caused by bacteria and not a virus. The destruction to the island that this period in time has caused is still evident to this day. The soil is completely corrupted from all the bodies that were destroyed on the island. A test was carried out on the earth and it was found that over 50% of the soil is made up of human ash and remains. That is a crazy high figure, but worse yet is the thought that every step you take on the island, you are actually walking on the bodies of the dead. One huge graveyard, you might say. But it doesn't stop there. You see, it may be years ago that the last person died on Poveglia Island, but that doesn't mean that it hasn't held on to the memories of the dead. The one thing that many people notice right away is the smell of decay that emanates all around. Many people believe that this is because some of the dead were not properly buried or burned, but honestly, the smell should have been gone within several weeks. So why is it lingering? Even though the bodies were destroyed by fire, there are still charred bones washing ashore to this day. Many believe that over time, erosion is causing the old bones to become unearthed, which means more can be expected. Fishermen to this day will do anything to avoid Poveglia Island. It has been reported that when the skies are clear, you can look into the waters near the island and see skulls and bones under the surface of the water. If the fishermen drag in a net full of fish and discover any trace of bones from the island, they will throw the entire catch away. But it's not just the bones that keep the fishermen away, but the ghostly sound of screams and moans from the dead on the island that carries on the evening breeze. But something else that disturbs the fishermen is the sound of the bell ringing from the tower on the island. First off, no one is living on the island anymore, and secondly, the bell was removed, leaving many to believe that it is a supernatural force at play. It might well be the spirit of a crazy doctor who is causing the bell to ring, and this doctor worked at the asylum. After the plague had died out, Poveglia Island took on a new role as it became an asylum. This was very poorly run and was a place of abuse, especially when one doctor used the whole asylum as his playground for cruelty. This man was apparently called Dr. Galo, but was also known by the nickname Dr. Torture, which kind of gives you a feel for how bad the guy must have been. He was the director of the facility, so staff would have been afraid to pull him up on his treatments. He would perform lobotomies regularly, which is done with a chisel and a hammer right over the eye. He would also perform surgeries just to play around too. For example, there are reports of him opening up skulls just so he could touch and play with the brains of the patients. Seriously twisted crap, and many procedures he did were far worse. Eventually, the mad scientist truly went insane. Many believe the patients who died at his hand haunted him, until bit by bit his mind left him. He ended up killing himself by throwing himself from the clock tower. So, as I said earlier, is the doctor to blame for the bell still ringing to this day? By the mid-20th century, the asylum was converted into a geriatric centre and remained so until it was finally shut down in 1975. During the time the facility was in operation, the patients would constantly mention hearing the voices of the deceased asylum patients and shadows creeping towards them. The other ghosts that have been seen by people over the years include a child spirit called Little Maria. She has been seen for hundreds of years and so thought to have died from the plague. This young spirit is not one that you would ever want to witness, as many would find it heartbreaking, as she is seen walking the shoreline and sobbing uncontrollably. It is thought she's trying to find her family. People who have been able to visit the island have reported feeling like they're being watched and followed. Even before some travellers have stepped foot on the island, they are filled with horror as voices whisper to stay away. Probably a warning from a plague deceased spirit, as they all knew you only came to the island to die after all. One of the easiest and yet creepiest ways to get into the hospital apparently is via a cremator. Those who have ventured inside the property have seen shadow figures creeping along walls, following them throughout the facility. Maybe they're wanting to make sure you do leave and don't end up trapped like them. Then there have been others who have been physically attacked with bruises and scratches as evidence of this. It seems nobody leaves without some kind of paranormal experience. The island was finally sold in 2014 for £400,000 to Italian businessman Luigi Brugnero, making it now privately owned. It's thought that he plans to open a luxury hotel, but so far there's been no news of an opening. It must have been a nightmare selling the land, but then to try and turn Poveglia Island into a luxury, relaxing resort when visitors know the dire history seems like a stretch, to be honest, but good luck all the same, as with the right marketing, maybe it could be a truly memorable location for more positive reasons. But currently it is a land filled with decaying buildings, soil that is mainly human remains, and a smell that would wake the dead, and maybe does with how active the island is said to be. Would you stay at Poveglia Island? What do you think of today's haunted location dissectors? I have to be honest, I think it would be a fascinating place to visit for the history alone, but the smells would be very off-putting. Seeing firsthand though some of the buildings and getting a feel for how life was, that would be something that many might not be able to cope with. I hope you have found Poveglia Island as creepy as I did. As always, thank you for supporting the channel, and if you would like to see more content, please hit subscribe and the notifications button so that you don't miss any haunted locations. And as always, dissectors, until next time, Stay safe out there.